software engineers have power at this company.
This is Adrien. He grew from a new grad to a principal engineer at Meta and shared the story of how his career grew.
So the first thing I did was like, hey, manager, I'm not going to do what my job is and what the team is doing because I think there's an opportunity there.
What's your biggest learning from the principal engineer promotion?
You need to have like the impact in the underlying work, but then it is also way easier to like build the consensus ahead of time.
The advice he gave could help any tech career.
How do you maximize your luck when it comes to people opportunity?
Oh, so many thoughts. The first one is,
Here's his full career story.
Can you tell me a little bit about the first team that you joined and why you picked it?
So I was actually pre-allocated. I joined what was then called the data science team, which you and I have talked about a little, is a little confusing because what we call data scientists nowadays is very different from what was data science then. In early 2011, 12, there was this emergence of big data. Mainly at LinkedIn and Facebook, teams of statisticians and computer scientists and early machine learning researchers leveraging a lot of data to build better products. So that was like the very early days of doing A/B testing and doing A/B testing at scale, doing measurement and proper measurement of things. And so that was that team. I was pre-allocated to that team because, I had a PhD. I was working on social network analysis. So I was joining this like small team of like 20 or so people. For the people who know the Facebook stack, that team had been behind like the whole A/B testing platform for the company, had been behind a lot of like all of the data pipelines that are being used to measure and count everything. We would often joke that, at the end of the day, we were just doing big counting. And so I was pre-allocated to the data science team.
Did you see yourself more as a data scientist at the time or a software engineer?
It's very funny. I have this very distinct memory of a conversation, my first one-on-one I had with my manager, Cameron Marlowe, who was managing the data science team at the time. We were standing in line, about to have lunch. And I was kind of a little pretentious. I was like, I have a PhD. I'm not a software engineer. And he was like, hey, software engineers have power at this company. You are a software engineer. Don't pigeonhole yourself into like a category or an area that is not like the most important job at the company. You are a software engineer. Software engineers create the products, obviously in partnership with PMs and designers and all of that. But software engineering carries a lot of weight. And yeah, since then, I've always considered myself a software engineer. Like that is my primary job. My title has always been software engineer, or my official Workday title. I think I was like a research scientist for a while in like the outwardly displayed things. I was a data scientist for a while, but no, always a software engineer. And then like I mentioned to you, around 2014 or so, the role of product analytics got renamed to data scientists across the company. So all of a sudden we moved from having, 20 data scientists or 30 data scientists, all with PhDs doing data analysis, doing software engineering and stats, to having, 500 or so data scientists doing mostly product analytics, which was kind of like a crisis in identity in the team I was on at the time. But, we quickly moved on. Like at the end of the day, the title was not the important part. The important part was the impact of the work we were doing.
Can you explain the difference between the product analytics and the old data science function? I'm curious, what are things that an old data scientist would do that a data scientist today would not be expected to do?
Well, one, that was like when we were building, 𝗹𝗶𝗫 and like all of those A/B testing tools. Nowadays, data scientists are mostly users of those tools. They're not the one who have like defined the algorithm or the sampling strategy or the double bootstrap or the bootstrapping that you're using to like compare test groups and whatnot. So it was a lot of people like Dean Eccles and 𝗵𝗵𝗫𝗀𝗀𝘁, like really amazing statisticians who were like building those tools that are now powering the company. So there were the tool builders more than the tool users.
And those tools allowed the data science function to scale, that people without that deep statistical understanding could go into a tool and understand data much more easily than someone in the past.
Yeah. There was just another example of the stuff we did at the time. I worked on how rumors spread on social network. That was like my very first project at the company. I worked with amazing researchers, 𝗲𝗏 𝗍𝗶, like she was eventually my manager and a director of data science at the company. But her background was like as an academic doing research on social networks. And so with her and Alex Dow and a few others, we spent the first 6 months I was at the company analyzing how rumors spread on social network. Now, by rumors, I really want to be specific here. Like I'm not talking about fake news, which is a slightly different flavor. I'm talking about rumors, mostly memes, and the type of stuff that end up on, say, Snopes. And the stuff we were looking at was the shape of those cascades. How do they spread? Do they tend to spread mostly in long chains? Do they tend to fan out? And it's really dependent on a few things. And there were fascinating results we found. We found that false rumors have a tendency to spread faster than true rumors. And even if you point out that a rumor is false, that doesn't really limit its spread. So that was the type of work we were doing. And so, I spent about 6-8 months doing that, published maybe 2 or 3 papers. I think the impact we had on the company was affecting the weight of reshares in newsfeed. We were like, hey, if we continue doing too many reshares, we're going to lose organic content. But that was the impact. So, my manager at the time was like, you wrote 3 papers, help tweak newsfeed, meets all, go figure out something impactful for the company.
It's super interesting. The false rumors spreading faster than true ones. And I mean, it matches intuition. If something's wrong, people are more likely to then reshare because they say this is wrong, which then some percentage of people who agree with it will share it because it's right. Another polarizing set of people will share it again and say this is wrong.
I think it's more that false rumors tend to be more egregious. And because they're more egregious, they are inherently more shareable or more viral. True things tend to be more boring than false things on average.
I want to go into your first promotion story, kind of getting to the senior engineering level. Can you talk about the story behind doing that at Instagram?
Yeah. So, after this rumor work, I was very lucky to just meet Mike Krieger, who was, co-founder and CTO at Instagram. Instagram had been acquired in September of 2012. It was a very small team at the time. I started talking to them in early 2013-ish. And the team was still relatively small. The core Instagram team at the time was probably 30 people. And then there were a lot of Facebook people around helping on the safety side. There were a few people starting to help on the data side. Just to give an idea of the maturity at the time, this is when the very first data pipelines to count how many users on Instagram were created. And I was like, hey, this is a cool product. It's, this little photo social network that we've acquired. They don't really do anything with data. There's no personalization. There's an opportunity to do something cool here. And so the first thing I started helping with was the Explore tab. The Explore tab, circa 2012, 2013, was basically the most popular content on Instagram. And with a few others, we decided to add a little bit of personalization to that and surface, popular content from your friend, content you might be interested in. And so we did that. We started building, a bunch of different sources. And then there was this question of well, how do we know if it's good or not? Now, obviously, it's probably going to be better than only having popular content on the platform. But there was a desire to understand the impact of what we were doing. And similarly, I was also helping out with some people looking at growth and user acquisition. And can we plug into Facebook and deep link you into Instagram or promote Instagram within Facebook? How do we measure conversions here? Instagram didn't have any A/B testing system. So, as an old IC4, I was like, you know what? I think Instagram needs A/B testing. So I talked to a few PMs and I talked to Krieger and Kevin Systrom. And everyone was like, yeah, we have bigger fish to fry right now. Instagram was in the midst of what we're calling Instagration, which was migrating Instagram from AWS, where it was running, to the Facebook infra for cost and all of that. And so they're like, yeah, your little A/B testing idea is good. We'll come to that later, but like we have like really important things we need to do now. So please don't bug us. And I was like, I don't know. Let me try and see if I can build that. And so I roped a PM, Jeff Cantor, to get, error cover on what I was doing. And I just kind of hacked something together. Now, Facebook had an A/B testing system. So I was like, I want to reuse this as much as possible. But like I said, Instagram was running in a different infrastructure. So how can you plug those things and connect them together? I did the dumbest, hackiest, probably very expensive thing I could do, which was add a custom Facebook API endpoint that was allow listed on the Instagram app ID, which was essentially log those things. And so that way you could like log all exposures over the internet, sending that from AWS using the Facebook API. Now you're logging your exposures. So that's like half of the problem is solved. The other half is like, how do you hash users into the right groups? There's like, 50, 100 lines of code. So replicated that on the Instagram side. And at that point, I just had a system to hash users into buckets, log exposures, and we already had some like data in our data warehouse. So I could connect that to the backend deltoid of our A/B testing system. So I had all the different pieces. So at that point, I was like, okay, I can kind of like run some like web experiments. Unfortunately, we don't have a website, or it was like very early days of the Instagram website. So I think the first thing I did was like a server-side AA test to prove that it worked. And then I found like a mobile engineer who was willing to, help me with like the iOS code and with the Android code. And then we started running like 1-2 small experiments, like very small things just to prove that like the system worked and that it was scaling, and it did. So that's the story of like how we brought A/B testing to Instagram. Now, obviously, after integration and all that, everything has been like probably written 4 or 5 times since then. But that was the story behind my promotion. I built that thing. By the way, I had no idea that promotions existed at that point. I was like a little IC4 who was completely naive, was just working on things because I was excited about them. I didn't pick that because I thought it would be successful. I picked that because I needed it for this other thing I wanted to build. 𝗪𝗶𝗀𝘀𝗁 season at the end of the year, my manager was like, congratulations, we're promoting you to IC5. I'm like, what does that even mean? What is an IC5? And then I transitioned that A/B testing system to this newly created Datagram team, which went on to own and maintain that.
Interesting. I can already tell in your early career story, there are examples of unusual agency in chasing things down. I mean, sounds like no one told you to build this, and you have a few examples in that story of you went up to random people like the CTO of Instagram. You went up to a mobile engineer. You said, hey, you want to join in on this initiative? It sounds like that's pretty standout that you had that behavior so early in your career.
I never really thought about that this way. It was just, I think the early days of Facebook were very, very bottoms up. Everyone kind of operated like that, or at least that's how I understood the world, right? You need to do something and you can't do it yourself. So you try and find someone to help you with it. The early days of Facebook, I mean, obviously we still have hackathons nowadays, but there was such a big hackathon culture. In the first 6 months, I think I probably did 6 hackathons once a month. On a Thursday evening, you would spend the entire night in the office with other people hacking on something that was not related to your day job. And that to me was the culture of Facebook. And so naturally, when it came to my day job, it's like, of course I'm going to hack on something. Of course I'm going to try and figure out how do I achieve the thing I want to achieve.
Were there cultural differences between the early Instagram team and Facebook at the time?
So I never officially joined the Instagram team. So on the data science team, we were kind of operating as consultants, helping different teams around the company. And so, we would do like 6 month to a year stints embedded in a team, but my reporting chain never changed. I was very lucky to have few managers. I know that like a lot of folks have changed managers like every 6 months. I think in my first 2-3 years at the company, I had 2 managers, despite working on very different teams. Not joining Instagram, by the way, officially is probably one of the biggest mistakes I've made in my career. Not to say I have any regrets. This is more the flavor of like, I didn't buy a bunch of Bitcoin in 2013 type of regret. But I think my career would have been very different if I had decided to join instead of like move on to something else. In terms of culture, Instagram was like, it really felt like a very small startup within a startup. You know, Facebook was like 2,000-ish employees. Instagram, like the whole core team, everyone working on Instagram, we all fit in one big conference room. It was like 30, 40 people. And there was such a big focus on design and craft over data. That was very different. But other than that, it was to me like that same like energy of like just creating stuff.
When you say it was the biggest mistake that you've ever made in your career, what do you mean by that? And where do you think your career would have been if you joined Instagram?
That is really hard to tell. I think my career growth would have been accelerated. I might have like reached certain levels faster if I had joined that team at the time. If I look at the folks who were working with me in that space at that time, they went on to have really fantastic careers and, hitting like IC7s, IC8s, IC9s, IC10s way sooner than I have, or probably ever will. Like I said, it's really hard to know what the counterfactual is. And I'm also very happy with where I'm at in my career. It's just, this is like a road not taken.
After that, I understand that you built some frameworks and you worked on some additional tooling that was highly leveraged at the company. Can you talk about the story behind your IC7 or senior staff promo?
So like I said, I was kind of like playing around with like all those different projects, bringing data to like non-data teams. And I had my hits, and then in other cases, it didn't really pan out. So I got roped into this project to count the number of people using one of Facebook's property. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but in the process of doing that, that was around 2015 or so, we had to do a bunch of data processing. We had to do a bunch of machine learning and inference. And the tools we had were just icky. They didn't really work well. Like the developer experience was horrible. We would have to work within like one data pipelining framework and then move to like another thing to do the machine learning and the inference and then go back and forth. And I was like, this is not fun. I'm like wasting so much time just going back and forth. So I started building this little library that essentially let you do data pipelining within the machine learning orchestration framework. And at first that was just like me writing a bunch of helper scripts for myself because I didn't want to have to go back and forth. I didn't want to have to like deal with landing code in 2 different code bases and like synchronizing all of that. I was like, I want my code to live in one thing, do all of my thing in this code base, and then I'll be happy. But in the process of doing that, I just started tinkering a little. And I was like, why is that whenever I need to write a data pipeline, I have to like write the same boilerplate over and over again? It's always the same thing. Why can't I set those things to be the defaults? And so, I kind of like whittled away a lot of the boilerplate that you had to write. And so I put together this library where if you were building a data pipeline in the machine learning orchestration framework, FBlearner Flow, what would take you, say, 300 lines of code in like the canonical data pipelining system would probably take you 20 lines of code. You had this escape hatch to like add all the configuration, but by default, it did the right thing. And at that point, I was hooked. I was like, I am building a thing that can make people's lives easier. Forget about this like counting number of people on Facebook. Other people are going to figure that out. I want to help those people move faster. And so then I started looking at like other things where people were wasting time. And at the time, if you were a data scientist, like as a product analyst, if you were a machine learning engineer, the way you worked was by building or setting up your own tools. Half of the company was using Jupyter for notebooks. The other half of the company was using RStudio, which uses this like statistical programming language R. And the way you would set that up is you would look at one of like 10 different wikis that were all outdated, and you would have to like set that up either on a dev server or on your machine, a lot of manual steps. And I was like, that's kind of silly. We should just make it so everyone has a Jupyter instance running if they want, and they don't have to configure it. And so I just kind of like started building that. I remember telling my manager, it was probably February. I was like, hey, this is the beginning of the half. I'm going to take 2-3 months to just hack on this. And if it doesn't pan out come, April, I'll just find another project to like save the half and like, not get to meet most. And so I started hacking on this, roped in a couple more people. And we built what eventually became the very first version of Bento, which is the notebook platform based on Jupyter that's used all across the company. And at first, Bento was really, really dumb. It was just a script that would set up Jupyter for you. But we had this vision behind it. What if, instead of just being this like external tool that you have to set up that doesn't communicate with anything at the company, we integrated that better within the rest of the tooling? What if you could just open a browser, type Bento, and now you have a notebook that's running, and you already have the libraries that are built within the company that you can reuse instead of having to like figure out how to do that manually? What if you could have like other programming languages? Eventually, people start hack into that. And so over the course of about a year or so, we started like putting this system together. A big thing that I worked on after that was building Bento on demand, where instead of having a dev server where we would set up the system for you, you could just request an on-demand instance. You could work on that and then release it. Because we're doing that for like development environment. And we're like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You don't have to maintain a dev server. And so in the process of doing that, I helped lead the development of the platform. But more importantly, I put the team together. I transitioned into a tech lead manager role, started building a team. And the way I built the team was hiring people who were very excited about the tooling world. Actually, I just hired a bunch of people who were already building tooling on the side in their spare time. And I was like, hey, do you want this to be your full-time job? Sounds like you like to do this thing. It's super impactful. Do you want to do this full-time? And so, I brought in like a bunch of like amazing people. So with the team, like 6, 7, 8 people. And so I got promoted to TLM2, mostly on my IC work and the vision I had for Bento.
And TLM2, for people who are outside the company, is equivalent to senior manager, which is equivalent to senior staff engineer in the industry. And when you hear these great stories of new infrastructure or tooling that everyone takes for granted today, what I want to know is, what is the step-by-step process on how you actually get the tooling from an idea to something that everyone is using?
So for Bento, the notebook platform, the answer is we didn't really try to get adoption within people's existing workflows. What I did was twofold. One, we targeted bootcamp and data camp. So bootcamp and data camp for non-Facebookers is where the thing you go through when you onboard at the company. And we just went to data camp and we told everyone who was working with data, this is the way you set up your developer environment. You just use this thing. Or you can also just like go do it manually if you want. But you can also just like type this one word and you have your developer environment. The company was growing like crazy at the time, right? And so when you have this like amount of insane growth and, the company is going to say like double in size within like a year or two, you get your growth from like all of those newcomers who don't know the legacy systems. And then you get the stragglers because everyone else around them then use the new system. So that was like a lot of the growth strategy behind Bento. The other thing we did with Bento was provide support and maintenance for the legacy systems. And so, we built trust with users that way. So if you were installing Jupyter by yourself, you could go to that group that was unmonitored before us, and we would provide help and would provide support. And then over time, after building that trust, we would start encouraging people and be like, yeah, this like thing you want to do, I can give you a recipe that's going to take 25 steps to do that. Or we've actually built that in Bento. It doesn't really change your workflow. It'll just make your life easier. You'll move to that. So to summarize, step 1, find an easy way of getting a bunch of users because network effects work. Step 2, for the people who are on the legacy systems, just provide value to them.
That's super interesting because when I think of these developer offerings, I just always assume that you're going to have to influence a group of people that is using something today to switch off of something. In this particular case, in a growing company, there's this whole new user base. It's like all these people coming in, they're deciding from a fresh slate. And it sounds like your offering was a superior product in a sense. So it was a pretty easy sell.
And then the other thing we did too was go to, Alex Schultz, who's now the CMO of the company, but I was head of analytics at the time and Brady Lauback. And we just told them, hey, we know that there's a lot of pain within your teams. We want to help. We think that this is the first step. And, I remember Brady saying, yeah, this is a good first step. There's like those 20 other things you need to go fix. I was like, okay, let's take it one step at a time. And let's start talking more. There was no team at the time really building tools for data science and machine learning. And so this is when I actually ended up leaving the core data science team. And I reorged myself into the dev infra organization to start that team really focused on data developer tools.
Yeah, at the beginning of this story, you mentioned you took on some performance system risk. You literally told your manager, hey, I'm going to take on and build something that has a lot of potential, but also it might flop entirely. And then we can scramble to figure out performance so that, you don't get a below meets all rating. I'm curious, because at that time, the industry was not as intense when it comes to churning out short-term results. Do you think that trying to do something like that today would be more difficult? And do you have any advice on more generally how to take on risk to pursue these higher rewards?
I think the consequences of underperforming now are more drastic than they were 10 years ago, for sure. I think the strategies when you want to take risk is the same. Make sure you're on the same page with your hierarchy and your manager. At the end of the day, we are all evaluated based on our expectations. If you're not aligned on what is expected of you with your manager, then that is a problem. Now, I was on a team whose job was to provide help with data consultant in a way, right? Now, the thing I was building was tooling and infrastructure, not at all data consulting. So the first thing I did was hey, manager, I'm not going to do what my job is and what the team is doing because I think there's an opportunity there. Are you okay with me doing this? Can we make it so, we carve out 2-3 months for me to go explore that and make that part of my expectation? If it pans out, great. If it doesn't pan out, well, I was expected to go explore this. It was a calculated risk. We all agreed as a team, my manager, my skip, myself, that that was a thing I was going to do. And at that point, there's an agreement. This is the job you're going to do. Everyone is on the same page. I think it is a lot riskier to go and do your own thing. You lock yourself in a room, do your thing for 3 months, show up and you're like, I did this thing. And then everyone's like, yeah, but no one knew you were doing this thing. Over communicate, I think, is really the strategy I would recommend. And also be ready to hear no. I was very lucky to have a manager that said, yeah, I think it's risky, but it makes sense. Go do that. I've had, instances later on in my career where I wanted to go do a thing and I tried building that consensus. And what I was told was, no, don't do that.
You mentioned that you transitioned to a TLM during this leg of your career as well. What was the thinking behind that transition?
I was building the team, right? We were building this product. I knew we had to scale and we needed more people. And so then the question was do I go hire someone to manage me and the rest of the team? Someone who might come in with a different vision for the team or a different strategy? Or do I try this management thing? And so to me, it was really driven by a desire to just, take this little crew we had assembled and lead them or support them in building this product we wanted to build. So it was kind of a natural evolution. It was not really a thought out, I want to be a manager, I'm going to transition into management and find a role like that. It was just, I was tech leading that team. We needed more people. The team needed a manager. I ended up being the manager.
So after you got this IC7 promotion, I understand that you left Meta with a desire to start your own company.
Yes.
What was the thinking there and the story behind you leaving? How did that go?
At that point, I had been at the company for about 7 years. That was the only company I had ever worked at. My professional experience before that was, like I said, doing a PhD, working in my own corner, 7 years of Facebook, and growing tremendously, learning a lot, but also not really knowing what happened in the outside world. And then I think there was also maybe a little bit of hubris. I was I built this platform that's being used by, at that point, 60% of all people doing data at the company. I was I can go build that externally. if Facebook needed this in 2018, the world is going to need that in like 2020, and I'm going to go build it. So I left, and I thought I was going to do a startup. And then I realized that I'm not an entrepreneur, or I wasn't at the time. It might change in the future, but at the time, that was not who I was. I really enjoyed going deep into technical problems. And I think I had maybe underestimated the amount of work at the time needed for me to like build or rebuild by myself what our team of like 6 had spent 2 years building on like a very mature infrastructure. I often joke that like I left the company to do a startup and I ended up taking a sabbatical instead. It was wonderful to travel the world. I went to like a lot of like wonderful places, but I did not start a startup. I built a few prototypes. I found other people to work with whom we had like different ideas. Nothing really crystallized.
What were the skill gaps between yourself at the time, successful tech lead, and an entrepreneur?
In order to be a successful entrepreneur, you need to be able to delegate the hard stuff, right? You scale yourself through others. And to me, at that point, it basically meant that whenever something became interesting, I would have to find someone else to do it. My involvement would have to be superficial. And so, I could hack a prototype together, but like if I wanted to take it to the next step, I would probably need to find like some engineers to go work on that while I go like, try and figure out how to get people to use the thing in the first place. And I wasn't really into that.
So after the sabbatical, you boomeranged back to Meta. What was your thinking behind going to Meta?
So like I said, COVID happened. I was living in New York at the time. And I was stuck in my tiny apartment. And I don't know, on a whim, I decided to buy a house in Denver. So moved to Denver, bought the house, got a mortgage. And I was like, I need like a full-time stable job. I interviewed with a few places. I had a few offers. At the end of the day, the reason I came back to Facebook was James Pierce. James Pierce is a fantastic manager. He was a director of engineering. His claim to fame is, he was the manager behind the open source program at Facebook in the early days. He worked on Portal. He worked on so many amazing things. And I always looked up to him. And so when it came time to find a new role, I reached out to a few people in my network, including James, and he was like, yeah, I'll take you, come work for me. So I interviewed, I did a behavioral interview because I boomeranged. And they were like, yeah, you're still not crazy. You can come back. Got a few other offers, but like at the end of the day, it was really the draw of working with, a few people I really knew and respected.
And then I understand that you went to Clubhouse after boomeranging.
So this is the crazy thing. I came back to Facebook in the summer of 2020, spent about 7 months working on data infrastructure, kind of related to the stuff I had done before. And then a buddy of mine just put me in touch with one of the co-founders of Clubhouse. And now, if you remember, Clubhouse is went crazy viral and crazy growth in like late 2020, early 2021. And I remember, talking to them at first, not seriously, because I was like, I've just been back at Facebook for 7 months. I can leave now. But I talked to like the two founders and I was like, oh, this is exciting. Oh my God, Zuck is on Clubhouse. And like, there's all of those people. Like it was having a moment. It was, all the talk. And so, yeah, I decided to join Clubhouse. When I joined Clubhouse, the company was like maybe 10, 11 people. Insane amount of hype around it, a lot of users. And yeah, it was a very interesting year I spent there.
Do you have any interesting insights or stories that you'd like to share?
I joined the company to help with the data stack. There was one person working on data when I joined, 𝗪𝗓, who was starting to put together the analytics stack. There was no machine learning at Clubhouse. There was no feed ranking, or at least not machine learned feed ranking. Clubhouse was like spamming people with notifications. And so a lot of like the work I did in the early days was just building a lot of those systems. Like I said, built A/B testing for Instagram, built A/B testing for Clubhouse, because we wanted to be able to measure the stuff we were building, introduced some machine learning to Clubhouse to filter out the notifications we were sending because it was very spammy.
What was the internal culture like?
The culture was just very hands-on. a lot of people were very, very eager, extremely talented pool of engineers. Clubhouse was like this interesting mix where I think, a large fraction of the company was either former Coinbase or former Facebook, pretty much. Yeah, a lot of like very independent, self-driven, hungry engineers who just wanted to build a really, really cool, authentic social network.
So after Clubhouse, you went back to Meta for a second
Yes.
boomerang.
For a second boomerang.
Cool.
I guess I had like unfinished business at Meta. No, when I decided to leave Clubhouse, I actually did a very thorough job search. I ended up talking to a lot of companies. I had an offer from Apple that I really considered. The reason I decided to go to Meta was twofold. One, a manager, Vincent Hardy, who had been my manager in the past, whom I wanted to work with again. Vincent at the time was the manager, the engineering director behind Ray-Ban Stories. Ray-Ban Stories is this partnership, the glasses between Meta and Ray-Ban. And I was like, I've never worked on a product. I've never worked on hardware. I have this connection who is working on that, and he's willing to take a chance on me. I kind of want to see what that pivot would look like, being, not being the data guy anymore, but kind of like working on something else.
Yeah, that was one thing I wanted to know, which was you were entrusted with this 𝗪𝗏 role working on in a very different domain than your past experience. And so it sounds like the key that got you that role was that you came through referral through someone, a trusted past manager.
No, not entirely. So I was not interested with like any 𝗪𝗏 role from the get-go. I came back to the company as an IC7. Ray-Ban Stories had been released in September of 2021. And after launch, there were quality issues, there were growth issues. And so when I came in, what I was asked to do was like, hey, can you like look at our growth story? Like, you know about data. Can you look at like the data stuff a little bit, make sure like, we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's. And so I spent about 8 months a year working with fantastic leaders and engineers and data people on Ray-Ban Stories to understand like where were things breaking, where did we need to invest more, where do we need to measure more. And that's how I built the trust with that organization. So it's been about a year doing that. And then there was a reorg at the end of 2022. We merged a bunch of organizations together and people started getting different roles and, we moved people around. And I told my manager at the time, hey, it's been fun to do this, but the reason I joined Smart Glasses in the first place was I wanted to work on Smart Glasses. I didn't want to be the data guy anymore. There's this project. I would really, really like to work on that. I know I don't have experience in hardware and product, but like you've seen, my track record of the last year, I've developed this like product sense. Can I go help with that? And he was like, yeah, you can move on to that project and work on that. There was another engineer who was actually the 𝗪𝗏 and BSTO for that entire program. And so I spent the next couple of years essentially like working on that and just kind of like gaining more scope over time. And I ended up, kind of like supervising all experiences across this specific hardware line. I'm not going into details because the product is not yet released, but my job was to make sure that like all of the experiences, the user experiences on this specific device were good. And so that meant working with a lot of different teams across smart glasses and eventually what became wearables towards the end to make sure like we were shipping the right set of user experiences.
Were there any growing pains in switching into this new domain?
I think there were a lot of growing pains in the organization as the organization was growing and maturing. And so naturally, those kind of like rippled onto me. In the early days, I struggled a lot with working or the cadence around working with hardware. I started working in 2022 on something that will be released at some point, is currently not released. And so this like extremely long lead time and validation and like, putting things in the hand of users was kind of missing. But once I got to a point where at least there was like internal fish fooding and dog fooding within the company, and we started getting like some feedback and some signal that made things a little easier.
Do you have any advice on how to ramp up successfully in like a completely different domain?
I think it's the same thing as like ramping up at a new company, or a different flavor of it. I use the boss strategy of doing the social network exploration thing first. Talk to people, ask them who I should be talking to. Don't be afraid to ask dumb questions. Like, you're the noob on the team. Like, everyone knows that you don't know anything. I'd rather ask a really silly question now rather than 6 months from now, not know what we're talking about. And try and get your hands dirty. It's a thing I've always tried to do. Check out the code, even if you're not going to like work on like, I never officially worked on firmware, right? I did check out the code and I did make a few tweaks just to like get a feel for it, get an understanding of it, and then kind of like map things out this way. And then I'd say the last thing I'd say is pick a hard problem to solve. I learn a lot by doing. And so, this might not translate to other people, but like I learn by doing. So I pick a hard problem to solve where I have kind of like an idea of how to solve the thing. And then I can fill in the blanks as I go. And that's where I learn.
On this team, this is where you got your IC8 promo or your principal engineer promo. I'm curious, what's the story behind that promotion? What is the scope that actually got you promoted?
Well, so in this case, I was eventually responsible, like I said, for like all experiences on a device. And so I was working across multiple orgs, dozens of teams. I think at some point, like the set of PMs I was interacting with was probably like 35 or so PMs. And like, however many engineering teams are working with that. My job at that point became a lot of like coordination and just like overall architecture. And my responsibility was making sure that we were delivering on our milestones from an experiences perspective. The reason I say experiences and not the whole device, by the way, is that the way we were organized is there were teams working on the OS layer. And, I would like work a little bit with them and communicate requirements and like poke holes into their story. But there were partners. I was not responsible for like that part of the stack. My responsibility was very specifically on the experiences we were shipping. So if you think about, say, Ray-Ban Meta, for example, which is a product that's in market, the experiences on that would be all of the AI on the device, all of the music listening, the photo capture, and then all of the companion app stuff. So you can imagine something like that for another device. So that was the scope. I can go into a little bit of details on like how I actually got the promo, because that one was a little bit more work. Like if I think about like my entire, set of promotions from IC5 to IC8, IC5, I had no idea that promo was a thing. It was kind of like a surprise. IC6, I had to like talk to my manager and be like, okay, do you think we can put me up for promo? And my manager was like, yeah, okay. Yeah, I think you're ready. And it went through. IC7, it took a couple of cycles where we like to like do a few revs. IC8, I went to my manager, and my manager at the time had never done an IC8 promo. And we're like, okay, so how do we do this? We partnered on writing the promo packet together. I wrote like a substantial amount of the promo packet, obviously with his help. And then, building consensus within the organization, going to like multiple VPs early on and be like, this is the work that I've been doing. Do you see the IC8 scope here? Would you be supportive of the promotion? And like building that consensus and seeking that mentorship in some cases. There was a D2 in the organization who I knew would be absolutely critical in me getting this promotion. And so I went to him and I was like, you carry a lot of weight in this organization. I'd love to understand how I can make it to that level. Would you mind just having like a, monthly conversation with me, just checking in and helping me course correct? And so 6 months later, when, I went up for promo, he was supportive because like he had been involved in the process the whole time.
So identifying who the champions are is even more important for the highest level promotions, and working with them to kind of understand what your gaps are so that when it comes time for that discussion, it's just a matter of logistics, but everyone is already aligned prior to that room.
Yes. Now, to be clear, I don't want to make it sound like getting promoted is just a social game. Like you need to have the underlying work too, but you need to have both of those things. You need to have like the impact in the underlying work, But then it is also way easier, at least in my experience, to like build the consensus ahead of time, so that when you go to a performance calibration session, you don't have to you don't have a debate in the room. And so for my IC8 promo, it took 2 cycles. Like the first one, we started socializing. My manager didn't even put me up for promo officially in that cycle. He just talked to people around and be like, just feeling the water. And then in the following half, people had that context. They're like, oh, we're having this conversation. This is going to happen eventually. Let's see what's missing, what we can do this half. And then obviously then, with the amount of work I did in that half and the impact I had and that support and mentorship, that's how I ended up getting it.
When it comes to the scope and the role that got you promoted, it's a role that it requires permission from those around you to have that role. There's only one Uber tech lead relatively. There's one of that role available. It's not like you, kind of like your Bento story, you created a role without permission from others and you kind of built it up into something. When it comes to that first type where there's a limited role and there's probably other people who would like to have that role, do you have any advice on how to secure that scope for yourself, or go towards that if that's something you're interested in?
So funnily enough, that's not exactly the case, because in this case, there was an Uber TL for this entire program, and he's a fantastic engineer, Jin-Sung Yu. I just identified that there was a lot of work on experiences, specifically on the experiences side, working with product and design that I could help with, where, he could focus on like the broader program and I could just like narrowly tackle that area. And so, over time, he and I built this trust where I just started focusing on that. And I started taking that off his plate. He didn't have to worry too much about it. Instead of having to coordinate with like 10 or 12 different engineering teams on experiences specifically, he could just go through me. The system stuff, everything else he would do himself. But I ran a very tight ship on experiences. And so I made his life easier. And so in a way, I kind of like took that role upon myself. Like there isn't really like an Uber TL for experiences on each product line. I just kind of like, carved that out for myself within that specific program. Now, at some point, I worked with my leadership and I was like, hey, I've been doing this thing. And people are asking like, why is Adrien doing that? Do you mind if we just say that like I'm the TL on experiences? That would make my life easier. But it became a post hoc thing. Once I was already doing the work and I had done the work for about a year at that point, I just asked to be blessed with like a little label so that I could explain who I was in a sentence, as opposed to I'm just this engineer who's like touching all of the experiences. Another thing I really want to make clear here is that, I've heard a lot of engineers talking about scope as in like stealing scope from other people. That is the wrong way to think about it. Taking something off someone's plate doesn't mean that you're stealing from them, or it is if you're not talking to them about it. So again, and this is a constant across everything I've been talking about, over communicate. I went to that engineer. I was like, hey, I am very excited about this space. Do you mind if I like help with this? And he's like, yeah, sure. I'm swamped. If you want to take that on, take it on. And then, I come back a few weeks later and say, hey, there's this other kind of like related thing. Is it okay if I talk to them? He's like, yeah, sure. Knock yourself out. And like, in the process, then he can go and like explore other things and broaden his own scope.
Yeah. In my mind, it's a win-win for him, because I imagine you helped him scale himself so he can, chase some other scope. Maybe he's going for IC9 or something like that. And he has evidence that he grew someone to IC8 or helped. I don't know if that was the case in this example, but oftentimes TLs are gracious to give scope so that they can move on to bigger things and help you grow into their role.
And similarly, I've done that, with like more junior engineers, where I had to actually fight with more junior engineers and tell them, hey, can you actually take that and like just own it? Like it's going to be good for you. I also would love to like be able to delegate that to someone.
So coming to the end of your career story, I wanted to do some reflecting across some of the things that I saw. One thing I wanted to ask was, you have a unique skill set that is very software engineering heavy and also very data heavy from your past experience. And I'm curious, what unique career experiences were only possible through that lens?
I think all of them. I think I've always tried to be a well-rounded engineer. And, in addition to software engineering and like data, I think I've always tried to like develop a strong product sense and a strong design sense. At Facebook, we have like those archetypes once you reach senior staff and principal. And I've always been a product hybrid. And to me, like this like well-roundedness is where I can add value, being able to both, have like a deep product conversation with product management leaders and the next day go down and like debug some like firmware code. Like being a well-rounded person, I think, is one of the things that I've always taken pride in. Robert Heinlein has this quote where he says, like, a competent man should be able to like do all of those things, write a sonnet, die gallantly and whatnot. And he finishes and says, specialization is for insects. And it's one of the things that like I've always taken to heart. I love learning and I want to try and be good at a lot of different things. And then, bring this like panel of things to the table. And so when I was working in wearables, I would like build little prototypes, like design my own little circuit boards and like hack things together. Like obviously not production ready. I'm not a hardware engineer, but like having the ability to do that type of stuff means that you can start a conversation with people. You can go and, talk to a product lead and be like, hey, I have this idea. Here's the thing you can play with.
One thing you said, and this is evident to me throughout your career, you said something that, your career is a series of bumping into the right people, or you mentioned a quote like that. And throughout each leg of your story, there tends to be someone who either brought you along or was instrumental in one of the projects that got you promoted. I'm curious, do you have any tips on how to, I guess, maximize your luck when it comes to people opportunity?
Oh, so many thoughts. The first one is, I've been talking a lot about myself for the last like hour now. None of the stuff I've done would have been possible if I was working in a vacuum. Like everything I've done has been, working on a team, convincing people, getting people to, go in bad for me. Like some younger software engineers, I had rough edges when I was earlier on in my career. I had like very strong opinions about things, and that didn't always work out in my favor. And so I learned very quickly that, we're all in this to succeed. And the best way to succeed is to help others succeed. Not to want anything in return, but just, fostering success around you, right? A rising tide lifts all boats. And that's the thing that I've been trying to do in my career, probably for the last decade or so. The first like 2-3 years of my career, I was maybe a little selfish. And then I started realizing, hey, we can all succeed together. And so when you build that trust, and, I'm not saying I'm going to be friends with all of my coworkers. When you have relationships of trust and respect with people, that is a really good way of making sure like eventually, if you have a need, that person is going to be there for you. Like you don't do that in order for them to be there for you. You are a good person. You're a trustworthy person. You build trust, and then you will reap the benefits of being a good person eventually. That's one thing. 2, don't be afraid to ask. Every career change I've made, I have never applied for any job on a website. I have always reached out to someone I know. Once you build this relationship of trust with people, and you're comfortable asking them and be like, hey, there's no pressure. You can say no if you don't want to, but would you mind just doing me a little favor? So don't be a dick, essentially. Build trustworthy relationship with people. Don't be afraid to ask, but also don't be afraid to hear no or not hear back from people. People are busy. That's fine. The way you maximize your luck is I was reading something the other day about like the surface area for luck. Take more shots. The more shots you take, the more likely you are for one to land.
And then the last question I'd like to ask you is, if you could go back to yourself when you just graduated college in France and give yourself some advice knowing what you know today, what would you say?
Be a good person. invest in things that are fun. Invest in your relationship with your coworkers. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day who gets the credit. Everyone is going to get credit for something. I think early on in my career, I was very credit driven. Be patient. I think there were a few times in my career where I was pushing for a promo when I wasn't ready. Like my IC7, like I said, took like a couple of halves to go through. And stay curious and mostly just like enjoy it. You're going to have an amazing adventure.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for sharing your career story with us, Adrien. And now if you want to share with the audience where people could find you, maybe they can go, and I'll put it in the show notes.
Sure. At this point, I'm mostly just active on LinkedIn, so we can put my LinkedIn in there. And then, yeah, no plugs. I hope that the audience will get something out of this.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing this with the community.
Thank you so much for having me, Ryan.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. I don't sell anything or do sponsorships, but if you want to help out with the podcast, you can support by engaging with the content on YouTube or on Spotify. If you want to drop a review, that'll be super helpful. And if there's any guests that you want to bring on to, please let me know. I feel like sourcing very senior ICs, there's no well-studied list out there on Google that I can just search this up. So if there's someone in your org or at your company who you really look up to and you want to hear their career story, let me know and I'll reach out to them.